Hello everyone, Andre here from SWL. Welcome to episode 22 of my series, the SWL DXing News Report. This episode was recorded on the 22nd of February 2025. In this podcast, I talk about radio-related news, frequency changes, news stations, closures, and anything else that might interest DXers. An RSS feed link is available via Spotify. You can find that in the video description. In this week's episode, I talk about more cuts at BBC World Service, the Taliban closing down a radio station aimed at women in Afghanistan, and a research finding that radio is still the most important platform for music discovery, especially in Africa, where I am, but also globally. I also talk about a special live concert that you can hear this week on BBC One. There is some shortwave frequency news, and I have an exclusive reveal of a new and rather unique emergency radio to be released in March. I share a reception report from Goranko in Serbia, and I end, as always, with a short HF propagation forecast. The BBC reports that BBC World Service has announced it will cut 130 jobs as part of a plan to save around £6 million in the next financial year. Planned cost-saving measures include closing posts in the United Kingdom and internationally, as well as some roles in BBC Monitoring, a division which reports and analyzes news media from around the world. The World Service was given a funding boost by the government as part of the autumn budget, but financial pressures and the previous 2-year freeze in the license fee means the corporation's projected total deficit will increase to £492 million for the 2024-25 financial year. Despite the cuts, the BBC said it will continue to provide journalistic coverage across its 42 language services. The BBC added that the service is operating in a highly competitive global media environment, where international news providers invest billions in state-backed media, and this leads to increased competition for its staff, platforms, frequencies, and audiences. The BBC World Service is predominantly funded by the UK license fee, and it has also received a grant of £104.4 million from the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in previous years. Reporters Without Borders say the Taliban's Ministry of Information and Culture has suspended the broadcasting license of a women-focused radio station in Kabul, Afghanistan. The Taliban accused them of committing multiple violations, including having ties with a foreign television channel. The station has been identified as the Kabul-based Radio Begum, which was launched in March 2021 and aimed at providing exclusive content for women. This content includes health and educational information. Agents from the Taliban's General Intelligence Directorate, accompanied by members of the Ministry of Information and Culture, raided Radio Begum's premises, interrogated employees, confiscated computers, hard drives, and mobile phones, and arrested 2 employees, both men, Reporters Without Borders say in a statement. Radio Begum appears to be the most recent example of an escalating crackdown in Afghanistan due to the Taliban's Vice and Virtue Law, which explicitly bans the broadcasting of women's voices. In addition, the Taliban heavily censors the coverage of women-related issues. Radio remains the world's most powerful music platform, outpacing streaming services like Spotify in reach and influence, reports the South African website Biz Community. A new analysis by Radio Monitor, a British music company that tracks the worldwide airplay of songs, emphasizes the enduring dominance of radio. Radio Monitor says that more hit music is heard on the radio than on all other music platforms combined. Nowhere is this more evident than in countries like South Africa and Nigeria, where radio exposure outperforms streaming figures by staggering multiples. Nigeria stands out with an astounding radio multiple of 48. This means that songs receive 48 times more exposure on the radio than on Spotify. In South Africa, where streaming adoption is higher but still limited compared to Western markets, the radio multiple stands at 31. This means that an average song in the country's top 200 radio charts is heard 31 times more often on the radio than on Spotify's top 200 chart. These numbers highlight a significant reality. In countries where internet access, data costs, and streaming subscriptions remain barriers, radio is the primary avenue for music discovery and exposure. While Spotify dominates the streaming sector with a 32% global market share, it still cannot match the mass accessibility and influence of radio in some regions. Even in well-established streaming markets like the United Kingdom, radio consistently outperforms Spotify, says Radio Monitor. The most streamed song of 2024 on Spotify, Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter, garnered 1.6 billion streams globally, that is, in the entire world. But in the United Kingdom alone, this song was heard 1.3 billion times on the radio. Beautiful Things by Benson Boone, Spotify's second most streamed song, reached 120 million streams on Spotify UK in 2024, but the song was heard 1.8 billion times on UK radio. 15 times the exposure. Talking of music, the BBC reports that BBC Radio 1 will be joining forces with 4 other radio stations across Europe to host Europe's biggest gig, a special one-off night of live music, celebrating each country's national music scene. The live music spectacular will see 5 countries unite for one night only, each shining a spotlight on their national music scene and showcasing an exciting artist. This artist will perform a live session of their biggest tracks. The event will take place on Tuesday, the 25th of February, from 18:30 GMT, that's Greenwich Mean Time. Listeners can hear all the action live on BBC Radio 1 via streaming, of course, if you are not in the UK, and via BBC Sounds. The country's broadcasters and artists performing are, in order of broadcast, the UK first, BBC Radio 1, the artist is Nia Smith. Then it's Ireland, radio station RTE2 FM, the artist is Orla Gartland. Then Belgium, the station is Studio Brussels, artist Sylvie Kreutsch. Then Germany, station is One Live, the artist is Berg. And then Iceland, the station is RAS2 and the artist is Ellen Hall. Some frequency news now. China appears to be using or testing several new frequencies for CNR1. These are 9830, 13610, 15410 and 15460 kHz. CNR1 appears to be on air from 2000 UTC on these frequencies. I heard all these on the 18th and 19th of February, and I did not find these frequencies listed anywhere else yet. Ifriqiya FM can be heard on 13640 kHz and 13855 kHz from 1900 to 0100 UTC. These frequencies are also not listed on either Shortwave Database or shortwave.info, but they are listed in the World Radio and TV Handbook. With monitoring these, Ifriqiya FM plays some interesting music and has very interesting programming. Radio Voz Missionaria from Camboriú in Brazil is back on 9665 kHz 24 hours a day. The frequency went silent for some weeks in January and February without explanation, but it is back. I have heard it myself, and various other DXers around the world have reported that they heard Voz Missionaria again on 9665 kHz. I have an exclusive reveal about a new emergency radio from the Chinese company Lijiani. This company also makes the very good little Clueblatt RD218 and the Lijiani RD239. The new radio, which will be called the RD908, is an emergency radio with a dynamo charger, various battery options. In fact, you can use 3 different types of batteries, a flashlight, and an alarm. It receives weather band, shortwave from 3.2 to 30 MHz, medium wave, and FM. It is splash and dust proof. I received a prototype for testing, and I made some suggestions that were implemented by the manufacturers. For example, one of my suggestions was to increase the memories for shortwave. Initially, there were only 30 memories. This has now been increased to 60. My initial testing of the prototype was quite positive. Medium wave is very good, and shortwave and FM are also good. The radio does overload when using an external antenna like the MLA30 Plus, but it performs better on its own whip and with a long wire. It uses the AKC6958 DSP chip, which is the same chip that is used in the Lijiani RD239 and the Radi RF919, a radio that costs well over $200. The RD908 has a very interesting shape. It looks like a big flashlight, and it's got a nice big handle. It has just a few buttons on the front and some buttons along the sides. I think this radio will appeal to hikers. It appears to be very sturdy, and it will be safe to use outside because it is splash and dust proof. It will definitely also appeal to people who need a reliable emergency radio. The dynamo charger, for example, will be very useful in case of power cuts. An initial batch of 200 units will be released in March. Lijiani does not have a website and usually sells its radios via AliExpress and Amazon. I have a reception report from Goranko, who lives near Belgrade in Serbia. He listened on a Golon and a Washiba radio. He heard the following stations. On 20 January, Radio Dabanga on 11640 kHz at 1700 UTC, SIO 444. On 12 February, Radio Filipinas on 15190 kHz at 1730 UTC, SIO 555. On 16 February, Bible Voice Broadcasting on 9715 kHz at 1830 UTC, SIO 555. On 17 February, Radio Farda on 12005 kHz in Persian at 1300 UTC, SIO 555. On 19 February, Radio France International on 7390 kHz in French. He heard this between 04 and 06 UTC in the morning, SIO 333. He heard Radio Romania International in Romanian on 7220 kHz at 0500 UTC, SIO was 555. And he heard Radio Romania International in Serbian on 5955 kHz between 1630 and 1830 UTC, SIO was also 555. Channel 292 on 3955 kHz. He heard this also between 0400 and 0600 UTC. SIO was 233. And on 20 February, he heard WMLK on 9275 kHz at 0300 UTC. SIO was 555. Lastly, Dengegel and the Turkish jammer together on 11510 kHz at 0400 UTC. SIO was 444. Thank you to Goranko for his reception report. To end, a brief propagation outlook based on forecasts from the NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center and the Australian Space Weather Prediction Center. Solar activity is expected to range from low to moderate levels from now until March the 15th. Geomagnetic field activity is likely to reach G1, that is a minor storm, levels on February 28th, March the 9th, March the 12th, March the 13th, and March the 14th. Active levels are predicted for March the 1st. Quiet and quiet to unsettled conditions are expected to prevail throughout the remainder of the period. So it looks to me like there will be no very strong geomagnetic storms over the coming weeks, and therefore HF propagation should be quite good in these coming weeks. There is a link in the description of this podcast to a website called Ham Radio for Non-Techies with clear and simple propagation charts that you can refer to for the latest HF propagation conditions on a daily basis. You will also find a link to the Australian Space Weather Prediction Center in the description of this podcast. That's all for today then. Please send me your news items and reception reports so that I can share them here. If you would like to share reception reports, please tell me your location, the radio you used, the stations and frequencies you received, and please provide SINPO or SIO codes for the signals you received. You can contact me at andre9@duck.com. That is ANDRE, the number 9 at DUCK.com. Happy listening, everyone.